Hey everybody, so we're talking here in the beginning of chapter 14 about 1946 again. So if you remember, we have just done what is essentially 1946 all the way up to about 1961 or so, the end of Eisenhower's presidency for foreign policy. So now we're going to go back in time and we're going to look at that same chunk, that beginning of the Cold War. We're going to look at it in terms of some domestic policy, things that are happening here at home. And after the glow of winning World War II kind of wears off, Americans find themselves with a lot of concerns. I mean, everyone's coming home and everyone's super excited, but at the same time, people are just wondering, will factory production decrease? Will we have what's called a recession, since no one's going to need all these products for the war? And if production falls, will unemployment rise? Will that happen? Or if unemployment rises, will workers get less money since there's more people out there that are willing to work for less? So people are really worried about this, and worry really kind of, just like they're worried about the Red Scare, they're also worried about the economy. Now, in reality, Americans didn't need to worry. They didn't have to freak out because people had been waiting for so long, right? We had the Great Depression from the 1930s, about 10 years where people can't buy extra stuff. We have rationing during World War II, another 4 years where people can't buy stuff, 5 years where people can't buy stuff. And so now we're going to see people finally wanting to spend money, get those things they couldn't get during those times. So we'll see people buying a ton of stuff, and unemployment won't rise thanks to something called the GI Bill, which gives money to veterans to go to college, to start small businesses, to buy homes, get in the workforce. So we're going to see all these veterans come back home, but we're going to see our government give money to veterans to have them be occupied again productively in our economy. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some real problems, because there are some real problems in America at the time. We're going to see down here, how does prosperity change the way people live? Well, we're going to see people become upset when they want to be prosperous over things like inflation and low wages. And we're also going to see people who get upset when some people have more prosperity than others. And we'll see people begin to attack unions if some people think that unions are hurting businesses and they're being too greedy. So, what does this look like? Wait, hold on. Here's what happens. Since people want to buy all this stuff for the first time in like 15 years, consumer demand goes up. When consumer demand goes up, that means you're going to have higher prices. Workers are going to be upset about this because these higher prices, well, there's a name for that, right? That's called inflation. Like, take a look at this chart. Inflation goes through some spikes. It goes way up in the 19 teens. Then it hits the 1920s and everything is great and everything is wonderful. And then we hit the 1930s and there's nearly not a lot of inflation. Prices really don't rise, right? They begin to fall. Here's the, that Great Depression begins. But then look, we hit 1940 and then huge price increase during World War II. World War II ends, 1945, and then prices begin to rise again pretty quickly as we hit 1945, 46, 47. And workers are really upset about these rising prices, not just because the prices are going up, not just because inflation is happening, but because they're not getting the pay raise to go along with the rising prices. If prices go up, that's fine as long as my wage goes up the same amount, and then everything is fine. If prices go up and my wage stays the same, that's no good. You're going to see a lot of people in a lot of different industries, automobiles, steel, railroads, mining, be really upset about this inflation. So they're going to go on strike for better pay, especially, and here's an example, the mining industry, it'll go on strike for better pay. And the response is just catastrophic. If you think about it, take a look at this. This is from an old newspaper from 1946, and it's talking about the impact of the coal mine strike. So there's a coal shortage that's paralyzing the nation. We're down to only 3 weeks' supply of coal. Industrial areas totally useless without their coal. Government agencies trying to keep supplies up for essential services. Automobile plants throw 350,000 people out of work because they have to shut down without the coal. Output for steel drops 57%. And it goes on and on and on. The nation's railways take 2,000 trains off their schedules. All of these things are there. And so what happens? Take a look. On Friday at noon, President Truman summoned Mr. Lewis, who's the union leader, and Mr. O'Neill, that's the guy who owns the coal mines, to the White House. Because what they're looking at is finding some sort of solution to the problem. President Truman, when he calls these people in there, he's going to put pressure on them. He's going to end the strike by having the government threatening it to seize the mines and at the same time pressuring mine owners to grant most union demands. So what you see here is Truman trying to solve these problems, but here's the catch. Most Americans look at this and say, you know what? Democrats aren't getting it done. Prices are rising. Labor unrest. You guys aren't getting it done. Republicans are going to see this. They're going to take advantage. And in 1946, they're going to be elected to Congress as the majority for the first time since 1932. And they're going to try to limit the power of unions to cut down on the ability of labor to create unrest in the economy. So we're going to see them pass a law called the Taft-Hartley Act, and it limits unions in two important ways. Here's one of the ways that it limits unions. It outlaws closed shops. Now, a closed shop looks kind of like this. Here's how it works. In the closed shop, let's say you have two different groups of workers applying. Some of them are already in a union, some of them are not. In a closed shop, you can hire only the people in the unions. That means that unions will maintain strength because the workers will be in the union. That'll give them more power when they go on strike. The other thing that it outlaws, besides closed shops, is this issue right here, what's called the union shop. See, the Taft-Hartley Act allows states to pass what it calls right-to-work laws, and those prevent union shops from being hired. So let's take a look at what that means. In a union shop, you can hire anyone you want. They can be in a union like this guy here, or people that aren't even in a union. It doesn't matter. You can hire anyone you want, but if you want to keep your job, everybody has to join the union. And in a right-to-work state, you don't have to do that. In a right-to-work state, you can be free from having to join the union up front once you get hired. So these are some of the ways we'll see President Truman trying to solve some problems, Republicans capitalizing on the fact that Truman's not able to solve a lot of these problems, and this issue of prosperity is going to continue to kind of be vexing to him as he goes forward. In particular, all the things that Truman wants to do to try and make lives better for people, they get shot down by conservatives and Southern white Democrats defeating all of his proposals. It doesn't matter what he wants to do. Between 1945 and 1948, he wants to do all kinds of things with Social Security and the minimum wage, public housing, national health insurance. He wants to do all these kinds of things in like his own New Deal, just like FDR used to do. He even wants to have a civil rights bill that outlaws poll taxes and protects African Americans' right to vote and makes lynching a federal crime. These are huge, huge things. But because America doesn't want, at least in the South, African Americans to have equal rights, and in many places in the North too, and because Republicans don't want to deficit spend anymore, Southern whites, Democrats, and conservatives will be able to block all of Truman's proposals. This makes people think that Truman could lose the election in 1948 because he can't get anything through Congress. They won't let him get anything through. Like, so for example, those white Southern Democrats, they're really angry at Truman for proposing these civil rights laws and civil rights legislations. Remember, Truman was the guy that in 1948 ended segregation in the armed forces. So even if Truman didn't get his civil rights bill passed, he still was able to get rid of segregation in the armed forces, a way to get some rights for African Americans. This kind of anger boils over, and white Southern Democrats end up forming their own political party. And this is them in 1948 at their political convention. They're called the Dixiecrats, or States' Rights Party. And the idea here is these Dixiecrats, these States' Rights Party, are going to say that they're going to preserve the states' rights to, prevent anyone from telling them what they have to do as a state. What they really mean is that the government won't tell them that they have to treat African Americans equally. And they're going to nominate this guy right here, Strom Thurmond, for president, a Southern man on a Southern platform. That means segregation. That's exactly what that means. So we're going to see the Dixiecrats angry at Truman. We're going to see progressive Democrats angry at Truman because he's not able to get any of his programs through Congress between 1946 and 1948. And the Republican, Thomas Dewey, the guy Truman's running against, is ridiculously popular. Now, a wise man would just call it a day, right? Not Truman. Not Truman. He makes endless speeches day after day after day. He travels to all 50 states by train, 200,000 miles in the final months of the campaign, 200 speeches. He attacks the Republican Party, and here's where Truman's clever. He says, yes, I didn't get Social Security expanded. I didn't raise the minimum wage. I didn't get public housing for the poor. I didn't get national health insurance or civil rights. But you know what? That's not my fault. That's the Republican do-nothing Congress. What has Congress passed for you, America? What has Congress done for you? Anything? They didn't do anything to help any of those issues that you were upset about. Inflation, low pay. They did nothing. I at least wanted to do something, and they kept me from doing it. It's not really a fair argument because that Congress did do some things, like the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Air Force, they create the CIA, the Marshall Plan, but all of those things, that's foreign policy stuff. It's not stuff here at home. In fact, Truman's message kind of connects with people so much, he actually is able to win. He's actually able to win. He pulls off a huge upset, a very narrow victory. He wasn't expected to win at all. And when he does win, he says, in my next term from 1949 to 1953, I'm going to have a new idea, the fair deal. It's not a new deal. It's a fair deal. The idea here is that every person in our country should get a fair opportunity. Everyone has that right. Doesn't matter where you're from or what you do. So what Truman does is he says in his State of the Union speech in 1949, which is right here, this is Truman giving this speech right now, he talks about the fair deal, and he talks about how in 1949 we have so many Americans living in poverty. So many Americans can't get access to health care. We've got workers, we've got farmers that are becoming poorer and poorer and poorer. Education completely inadequate. Prejudice, discrimination is running rampant, and it hurts our democracy. So in the fair deal, Truman says, we need to change America. He wants to raise the minimum wage. He gets that done between 1949 and 1953. He wants to expand Social Security to cover more people, including more African Americans. He gets that done during his term 1949 to 1953. National health insurance, aid for schools and farmers, he doesn't get those at all. I mean, and if you took a step back and you looked at this, the one program that Congress does pass under the Fair Deal that really does help have an immediate impact on our workers was raising the minimum wage to 75 cents an hour. And here's what Truman has to say about that. We've abandoned the trickle-down concept of national prosperity. Instead, we believe the economic system should rest on democratic foundation and wealth should be created for the benefit of all. In other words, we shouldn't worry about the rich people having money and letting that money just kind of fall down to the rest of us. We should make sure the rest of us are taken care of, and then everyone will do fine. So Truman does have some successes, but as 1953 is coming to a close, he's done. He's tired. He doesn't want to run again. In part, Truman doesn't want to run again because of what's going on. The Korean War is in a stalemate. The Red Scare is freaking Americans out. People just don't think he's doing a good job. And he decides that, he doesn't need the headache. So we know that Adlai Stevenson runs as a Democrat. We know that Eisenhower runs as a Republican. We know that Eisenhower is going to win, capitalizing on some of those things like the fears that Russia has the atomic bomb, right? He's going to campaign on that. He's going to win on that. He's going to be able to kind of make that connection, right? And Eisenhower is going to really begin to promote this idea. And he's going to say that, I believe, in the past 20 years, there's been a creeping socialism spreading in the United States, that America is becoming more and more communist over time, slowly, over the last 20 years, from 1930 to 1953. America had becoming more socialist in the eyes of Eisenhower. And he wants to make sure that prosperity doesn't change the way people live by making them socialist. He wants to keep capitalism in charge. So what is Eisenhower going to do? He's going to use common sense. You see, Eisenhower believes in this concept of common sense politics, kind of like Teddy Roosevelt does. Eisenhower wants to balance laissez-faire economics with getting government out of the way, with government involvement on important things in the economy. So in other words, he wants to promote business in the economy because what's good for business is also going to be good for the country. And if it's not good for business, he's going to cut those programs. So in other words, he's going to look at businesses that are out there and he's going to say, you know what? If you're a business that doesn't need assistance from the government, you're not going to get it. We're going to cut that aid to you. Instead, we're going to look for ways in which to improve the infrastructure of our country. So Eisenhower goes laissez-faire in a number of ways. He cuts aid for programs that don't need it because of creeping socialism, stops spending money on school construction, slashes funds for public housing. These are things that the government in Washington, in Eisenhower's opinion, shouldn't be involved in. That's not laissez-faire. But he is going to do things to actually improve the economy and put people to work as well. So he's going to help business, but he's going to also help people stay working. Examples of this: Federal Highway Act of 1956. It's the biggest interstate public works project we've ever had in our entire history. It is huge, gigantic. You can see all the stats right there in the yellow highlight. And it's a great example of this kind of common sense politics because it definitely helps business. These highways crisscrossing across our country will help business transform America. It'll be able to make life so much easier transporting goods and services, moving people around the country. It's great for business, but it's great for people too who need jobs. It's a perfect example of laissez-faire, help business, but also help Americans, common sense politics. Another one is the St. Lawrence Seaway, this one right here. St. Lawrence Seaway, it's the same gig. It's like a highway system for the Great Lakes. All those states that border the Great Lakes have all of this stuff that they want to create. Well, if we build a seaway that allows people to transport their goods from here all the way up to the Atlantic Ocean with no trouble whatsoever, then what we're going to do is, again, make more growth for business possible, but at the same time, we're going to put all these people to work building that seaway. So we have these great examples like the Federal Highway Act and the St. Lawrence River, where Eisenhower just uses common sense to get the government out of the way and to encourage people's growth. You're also going to see him do other things like Social Security, help unemployment benefits, raising the minimum wage, financial aid to farmers. This kind of common sense approach makes Eisenhower really, really, really popular. He's going to have a second term as well, serving from 1954, or 57, I should say rather, 1957, up until 1961. So, all of that being said, we'll do much more with this in class tomorrow as we kind of take a look at how these Eisenhower and Truman years change America domestically.